The US economy is now bigger than it was before the pandemic after growing 6.5% in the second quarter. But the recovery isn't keeping pace with expectations. Inflation is gathering pace and is already above the government's target of 2%. And the government stepping up plans to spend trillions of dollars to boost the economy and create more jobs. Mobin Nasir reports.
Home care workers have been demonstrating in Washington, D.C., demanding better pay and benefits. They say they've played a critical role in protecting Americans during the coronavirus pandemic, and it's time that their efforts were adequately rewarded.
Home care work is beyond essential. It's critical. These jobs should be the most respected and protected and well-paid union jobs in the country.
Not far from where these demonstrations are taking place, U.S. lawmakers have been debating a $3.5 trillion spending plan proposed by President Joe Biden to boost jobs and improve the country's infrastructure. On Wednesday, senators approved $550 billion for this effort.
Tonight's also a time to pay tribute to my colleagues behind me who have put together something truly extraordinary, which is a $550 billion much-needed contribution to our nation's infrastructure.
It includes $110 billion for building and repairing roads, bridges and highways in the country, $65 billion to help provide access to broadband internet services for millions of Americans, and $47 billion to ensure that infrastructure projects are congruent with environmental conservation goals. This spending bill still has to be approved by the House of Representatives, and the rest of the money that the Biden administration needs will also have to be approved through subsequent bills. Meanwhile, the economic recovery from the pandemic-induced slowdown is plateauing. On Thursday, the Department of Commerce reported that GDP grew by 6.5% in the second quarter compared to 6.4% in the previous quarter. That's much lower than the market expectations of 8.4% growth as businesses reopened and the government spent more on stimulus measures. A day earlier, the Federal Reserve announced prices are rising faster than its inflation target of 2%, but it's keeping interest rates unchanged near 0%, hoping that lower borrowing costs will help companies expand and hire more people.
This is now not so much about people going back to their old jobs, it's about finding a new job. So that's a time-intensive, labor-intensive process, and there may be a bit of a speed limit on that. There's research that suggests that there is a speed limit on that. So it's not like you can have millions of people at the beginning of the recovery going back in a single month because they're just going back to their old job. This is about job selection, things like that. There may also be some factors that are holding people back.
Despite these efforts, millions of Americans are still out of work. Last week, 400,000 people filed for unemployment benefits. That's twice as high as the weekly average number of claims since the start of the pandemic and above market expectations of 385,000 claims. And as protests in Washington, D.C. and other parts of the country show, even those who have jobs want the government to do more to improve their livelihoods. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more on the state of the US economy, let's speak to Professor Joann Weiner. She's the director of the Applied Economics Graduate Program at George Washington University, and she joins us now from Lake Tahoe in California. Good to have you back with us, Professor. Now, these latest GDP figures mean that the US economy is now, in fact, bigger than it was before the pandemic, and it really underscores just how quickly the US economy has recovered. Really, the recovery began just last summer. Can you explain to us what, in your view, has helped the US economy to really rebound so quickly?
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. In my view, the big rebound is caused by the tremendous growth in all of the IT, the communications, and the software sector. You look at companies like Amazon and Apple and even Microsoft just having record levels of profits. And also there's been a huge surge in durable goods spending by consumers. And don't forget, consumer spending is the biggest part of GDP. And there's been some business spending on infrastructure as well. So Last year, of course, the pandemic shut everything down, you slammed the door shut, and the recovery was over before we even knew it. I mean, was taking place before we knew the recession had even hit. So I'm not surprised to see such growth. Not as high as we would have liked, but still pretty darn good at 6.5%.
That's right. Now, how sustainable do you think that growth is? As you say, the market was expecting a growth for the second quarter 2 percentage points higher than what it actually recorded. Do you think the US economy can continue on this pace?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of room to grow there. As your report mentioned, there's still a lot of unemployment claims taking place. Services have not yet rebounded to where they were, and that's no surprise because a lot of those jobs are person to person. People are still reluctant to get out because of the coronavirus and the new highly contagious variant, Delta variant. On the other hand, a lot of the pent-up demand, and people were not eager to stay in their house for another another month or two, and so they're getting out. Even restaurants are full. I think what might be holding back some of the employment is the high cost of living. You see a lot of help wanted signs in a lot of shops, but people can't afford to live in those areas, and that I think is a big issue that we face right now.
Yes, and as you say, Americans opening up their wallets again really has been the big driver in terms of the rebound in the US economy. But that's also leading to higher inflation, as we know. As you say, there has been pent-up demand and supply is really struggling to keep up with that demand. Do you believe that inflation will tick up higher in the near future? And is it temporary, as the US Federal Reserve insists that it is?
Well, I would certainly trust Jay Powell's judgment over most people's judgment. But if you take a look at where the price increases are coming from, most of it is in COVID-sensitive areas. If you take a look at areas that are not subject to the COVID pressures, the inflation isn't very big. So I'll say that I'm not personally worried about inflation. We're certainly not going to where we were back in the 70s when we had the oil price shocks and stagflation. We're not anywhere near there.
Okay, Professor Joann Weiner, thank you so much again for joining us. It's always really good to get your analysis.
You're welcome. Thank you.